Well, a few days ago, the Memphis Police Department, there's 3 officers involved, shot a young man by the name of Martavious Banks in his back. They pulled him over for very nefarious purposes. They have a new system that they say can read license plates and determine if you have insurance or not. And in this case, they couldn't verify if he did or did not have insurance. So they pulled him over, and that's the incident that led to him being in critical condition for a week at the med. Not only that, the police officers fired into an occupied dwelling with an AR-15 rifle, having no idea who was in that house. There could have been a child's party. I mean, there was bullet holes past the door in the back wall of the living room. So that being said, TBI was not called immediately. They had 24 hours before TBI was called. The head of the Memphis Police Association, the police union, his name is Mike Williams. Well, it turns out that his son was involved, one of the officers involved in the shooting. And when I arrived on the scene, I saw Mike Williams at the scene. That is very, very concerning to me. His job is to protect officers basically at all costs. And not only that, his son was one of the officers. And he's walking around the crime scene. That's not okay, you know. The other part that's egregious about this, when it comes time to look at the body cam photo, which all the officers are required to wear at all times, the 3 officers involved, somehow none of their cameras were working.
Great. Hey, everyone. Hey, good evening, good evening. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I know it was short notice, but I felt the need to gather and fellowship and have some real tough discussions was here. And so I wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to talk, debrief about some recent events in our community that happened. But before I get started, I want to thank a couple of people before I get started. I want to thank Principal Johnson of Hamilton Middle School. Raise your hand back there. If this would not have been possible without her and her staff of making this, open up her auditorium in her school to allow us to have this community meeting. So I thank you so much, Ms. Johnson, for everything you and your staff have done for us. I also want to acknowledge we have Commissioner McKell Lowry in the audience. Thank you so much for coming out. And I am also being over-policed. And then I believe the second question is, continuing along that line, how do we define public safety? What actually makes us feel safe? And when are our communities safest? And I think we know that. We know that in our hearts, right? And what we want to do is see that reflected in our legislation. So right now, what we'll do is get into some questions. We have quite a few questions for Representative Akbari and soon to be Representative London. And again, so grateful to sit amongst these 2 amazing women who I believe is fighting every day to change the material conditions of our people. And so much appreciation to y'all. So let's get into some questions. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the first question for you is for you, Representative Akbari. What has already been done at the state level to address to move us closer to holding the police accountable?
I think with the initial legislation after the shooting a couple of years ago, there was a push for the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation to step in when there were incidents of a police shooting. Unfortunately, that legislation was modified, and eventually it rolled into a piece where the person actually had to be killed. The thing that's complicated when you pull in the TBI is that it requires resources, and so it has to be more than just an initiative of the legislative branch. It also has to have the support of the executive branch, because you need funding in the state's budget to cover that increase or potential increase in bringing in the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. So every piece of legislation has an assigned cost to it. Usually if the cost is 0, it's a great thing. If it's not, then there begins this dance with the executive branch and members of the finance committee to see if you can actually get it funded in his budget. So that's what makes it complicated, but I do think that transparency across the state. There seems to be an interest in it, regardless of if it happens in Memphis, Middle Tennessee, or East Tennessee. And it also seems to be a bipartisan issue. So that's encouraging. A lot of times with legislation, you know, you have baby steps, right? So the first step was to bring the TBI in if there was a murder, or the person was actually killed. I won't say murder because that's a little bit more defined, but if the person was killed, and now I think that it's ripe to go back and adjust it. I think also from a state perspective, what we've tried to pull in is sensitivity training, implicit bias training for those in law enforcement. I had a piece of legislation, not last year, but the year before, did not get the support I wanted, so we kind of put the brakes on it, and instead I tried to go more towards looking at healthcare and education as we continue to gather evidence. Because see, the problem is also anytime you want to pass a bill, you have to convince a committee that, and if they don't even believe the issue exists, it's hard to address it. I certainly had that issue looking at diversity sensitivity training for educators. I actually had the chairman of the committee it needed to go to tell me, well, he went to a seminar on implicit bias, but he doesn't know if he fully embraces the concept that it exists, okay? So the battle is bigger than just, it's bigger than you think, but it is encouraging. Like I said, first of all, we have a whole new slate of people coming into the legislature, including London, that I think is really going to bring a lot of energy and light to the issue, and that is across the state. So hopefully we'll be more successful and the battle will continue. But again, with anything worth doing, there are baby steps that have to be taken, and I think we're moving in the right direction. The unfortunate thing though is, until we get to that point where we have complete transparency, the community, it's difficult for the community to trust a situation where there's not transparency. And when you look at the body cameras, we had to go and pass legislation to even move that forward. And I think, when the state comes in, especially addressing something like turning off body cameras, potential punishment for that, that is a heavy hand. I'm hoping that can be addressed through the city council, through the Memphis Police Department, but at the same time, to have a uniform policy, that might be something we have to look into on a state level as well. And that's why it's so important for the community to be active, because anytime we try and do something like that, every group has a lobbyist. So the police association, the sheriff's association, the district attorneys, they're going to have their say on it. So it's important that the community comes up and also says, no, but this is what we need, and you actually serve us. Yes, you are a district attorney, but you were elected by the people. You know, yes, you are a sheriff, but you are paid with tax dollars, and you are elected by the people. So I think that's really important as well.
Thank you so much for that, and I appreciate the work that you've been doing in Nashville around this. And so now I'm going to move to you, London. We've heard about the work done around TBI. We've heard about the work around body cameras. And so my question is, what can state legislators do about police brutality and state-sanctioned violence so in a way that actually gets to the root of the problem, right? That gets to like racism and other issues that we see surface when we talk about police accountability and police misconduct.
I think that's a great question. So one of the ways that I've been exploring, I think we had this conversation earlier about ways that we can reduce police brutality and state-sanctioned violence, is make it harder to use deadly force. Right now, deadly force, much of that is up to police interpretation of what, their ability to pull out the gun, or the fact that, because you're running away, that's a reason that you can use your gun, or, how we arrest people, and key noises when people are screaming ouch, or they need help when dealing with the police. We need to look more at these policies and figure out how we're going to tighten them up so that we can stop issues like what happened to Martavious Banks. What we do know is the African American community, especially since we really want to focus on how police brutality affects minorities, especially African Americans, and that this community is predominantly African American. You understand that our community suffers more socioeconomic issues, such as lower pay, poverty. Our schools are not getting the resources that they need. And so when you think about something like insurance, right? Car insurance is really, really expensive, right? And yes, people do forego getting insurance, even though they're not supposed to, but they do, because they have to choose between, am I gonna get my child to school, or am I gonna make her stay at home because I can't afford $250 a month in car insurance? Many of them take the risk. And so we really got to think about, is that a reason for police sanctioned violence? And how many communities have an issue that it is too expensive to drive? And how does that lead to the fact that it makes it harder for those people to get to work and make a living? And so I think when we talk about, like you said, police sanctioned violence and police brutality, we really got to go back and start looking at some of the root causes. How can we make it more affordable for people to have car insurance so nobody else will be able to get pulled over and end up like a situation like Mr. Banks? So those are some of the things that I've been looking at that we can improve, and other policies as well. I was also thinking about, we need stricter cultural competency for our cops. Right now, a lot of the issues is there's a misinterpretation of our communities, our cultures. Me screaming out loud is may be disrespectful to one person, but it's normal to another. So we need to make sure the folks that are policing our community are from our community, or they're well educated on how we as a culture operate.
Thank you so much for that. And so leading into the second question, it appears to be the case that Mr. Banks was pulled over by the police under this tradition of broken window policing. And so many of the people in our communities can actually attest to the fact that they have been pulled over for some small issue simply because the police wanted to be able to interact with them to find a reason to arrest them and take them in. And so my question is what are some ways the state legislators can actually address broken window policing? I know you mentioned insurance, and so is it decreasing the number of reasons that the police can actually pull a person over and arrest them? What are some innovative ways that we can, in a sense, decrease the amount of contact that the police actually gets to have with our people? So I can start with you.
So I think that question is complicated, right? Because it's such a large issue, and there's so many factors that go into it. It's not going to just be one fix. I think London hit on something, though, when she talked about, first of all, just having a conversation between the community and law enforcement before incidents occur. Like building that trust, that relationship before we get to a situation where there's a crisis, where there's an incident in the community that is just devastating. So there is a move in the legislature to try and roll back at least some of the policies about the concept of driving while poor, being able to restore licenses, not taking away your license just because you owe a fee for something totally unrelated to driving. Now, I'll say there's a move from the legislative branch to do that. It took a court decision to make it happen, and the executive branch is suing. They're appealing that decision. So it's a battle, right? But it also takes different people being elected. Because if you look at the composition of criminal justice committees in general, you have to get creative when you try and pass legislation. You have to have common ground. The good thing is a lot of people, my colleagues in East Tennessee, hate the fact that they represent folks, they don't hate the fact that they represent folks, sorry, they represent folks who are rural poor, and they hate the fact that these people have to suffer from unnecessary fees and unnecessary harassment. So that at least is a starting point where we can try and bridge that gap, and it's all about counting votes. But again, I think for me, the tip of criminal justice reform in the legislature has focused more on expungement and decreasing offenses, not necessarily related to driving. There is a lot of discretion given to law enforcement, and in some areas that is justified, but in others it's not. And I think that leads to situations where someone might be arbitrarily pulled over, and then after they've been pulled over, cause has been determined. And then it spirals them into something like, I literally was just at Starbucks and I saw two police officers. There was a Mercedes, and it was an older Mercedes that had a paper drive-out tag. And the two police officers looked at the tag. I mean, they were going to McDonald's, I guess. They looked at the tag and they looked at it again. They both looked at it. Then they went inside and talked to the person, right? I didn't see anybody get arrested, and I was there for a while. I didn't see anybody get arrested. It seemed like it was a conversation. So I think more of that can help. And also, I'll say for the first time ever, like this year, our cost of incarceration hit $1 billion. So just because of that and the percentage that it takes of our $37.5 billion budget, I mean, it's large enough where it's like a standalone item. I think that there's already a shift to try and see how we can at least remove some of these low-hanging fruit offenses that leads to incarceration.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that. And so, London, we'll come to you.
I would just have to pretty much second everything that she said. You know, she hit straight on point when we got to think about, you know, how can we think about the cost of policing? We think about, you know, the whole cycle that people have to go through when you get into the criminal justice system and how that affects other forms of our everyday life. So again, you know, I think we need to continue working with the state and figuring out how we're going to improve those policies.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. That's extremely helpful. So now I just want to spend a couple moments asking people about their encounters. And so we'll just take 2 comments. But just like, if people want to just mention, like, what have your encounters with the police been like? And we'll go from there. And I'll give the mic to our friend. Go ahead and speak.
How y'all doing? I'm Malik Martin. I'm a local photojournalist in Memphis. And my most recent encounter with the police that I have a problem with, we'll just go with the most recent, was at the last protest. I was standing on the sidewalk filming. I basically had a toe in the street, and one of the cops pointed me out to be arrested. And the only thing that stopped me from being arrested was an older sergeant told him he's okay, being that I talked to that sergeant earlier in the night. But at the point, the biggest problem I have is, you know, anybody who is, like Hunter got apprehended, he was standing on the sidewalk, that they can pick and choose who they apprehend. And at the point that they start targeting media is where I have an extreme issue with, because I feel like they're silencing me. It's attacking my First Amendment. I was just doing my job and I wasn't agitating. But for them to fear that I am, you know, something to as a problem and that they can handle it is extremely worrisome. I think that as long as we have the blue code of silence that's in play, and that crooked, well, you know, the good cops will protect the good ones at the fact that they'll brutalize citizens who are standing up in the streets, we will never have any type of trust within the force. Because, I mean, the biggest thing about Martavious' situation is they ran his plates without him committing a crime. So it goes all back to them when they pick and choose to apprehend you. And that means all of our lives are in the hands of people with guns, and you just better hope they're having a good day. And that puts all of us in jeopardy, and it's something that we all should be worried about, because if that sentiment continues to grow, the more legislative power that they get behind them and the decisions that they can make with apprehending, you know, citizens, I just fear that the police state will just, you know, pretty soon we'll just have a TV in every room, Big Brother's watching you. But yeah, that's my latest.
Sir, can you say and spell your first and last name for us?
Yes, MALIKMARTIN.
Okay, thank you. And you said photojournalist, right?
Yes, for the Tri-State Defender, the new Tri-State Defender.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you.
Elijah Sledge. I'm just here to kind of get abreast on what's going on. I know a lot of times I'm not at all by any means, you know, condoning what happened, you know, but I think a lot of times, you know, we have to look at ourselves as well and police ourselves and to police our own communities as well. I have been pulled over by the police several times, and one of those times was for no reason, I thought. But as I understand how he explained it to me, there is a law that allows them to run license plates for insurance. And they can run those license plates to tell whether you have insurance or not. At this particular time, he ran my license plates, and it read to him that I didn't have insurance. That's why he pulled me over, and he had a trainee with him. Once I showed him my insurance, he then stated, well, it must be wrong in the system, you know, and he let me go. But I know a lot of times we as a community also have to hold ourselves accountable and at the same time educate ourselves about what's going on with the police system in our neighborhoods and learning the police that are in particular neighborhoods. All cops are not bad cops, you know, so I believe we have to understand those that are not and work together to form a system, to form a partnership, to do weekly, monthly, yearly community things that where those police officers can be in those neighborhoods and understand what's going on. I know when I was younger, one particular police officer saw me, and when he saw me every day, he preached to me what to do, you know, how to act as a young man. And a lot of the lessons that I got from him were ones that I carry to this day. And he was a police officer, and he patrolled the neighborhood around the schools, you know, and I think it's a whole lot to do with relationship building. We have to build relationships and build trust and also put systems in process to help us as a people. And I'm elated to have you all in the positions that you are, and I hope and I pray that we can come to solutions and we can get a grasp on what's going on here in our city.
Good evening, everyone. And London, thank you for calling this meeting. And we have to have police accountability. The police cannot continue to shoot unarmed black men and women and not be held accountable, not be indicted, not be sentenced and found guilty. This young man we're talking about tonight, if he didn't have insurance, was shot in the back, and as I speak, his condition is deteriorating and he's on life support. We shouldn't even have to be here tonight because the police need to do their job, but they do not need to over-police us and shoot people who are not a threat to them or anybody else. We need a citizens review board that has teeth, not just a review board in name only. And we need to do what's right. Every elected official who ain't in a meeting right now need to be here. The police need representatives who are listening. And everyone else. This auditorium should be full because our community needs to be in an uproar because this must stop, and it must stop now, and we must make sure we elect the right people who gonna do right by our community.
Thank y'all so much for those very moving comments. I think it grounded us in like, not just the need to hold police accountable, but to also rethink the role of police in our community. And so I think that moves us into the conversation around, one, I think, what can we do, right, to improve the relationship between the police? And I say that knowing the history of policing in our community, going on back to slavery, right? Understanding the role of the police during the Jim Crow era, understanding the role of the police during the Reagan era, and understanding that the role of the police has been to over-police our communities. And so, is there any way to improve those relationships? Or must we start thinking about other ways to hold, to make our community safe?
So I will go ahead and start off before I hand it back out for the audience to answer this question as well. I think we have to put an emphasis on community policing. I think as leaders of our community and elected officials, we have been pushing, relying on community-based patrolling versus officer-based patrolling, making sure we're pumping more resources into community members who want to watch after members of the community. And so I think that's something that we need to be moving towards. Also, we need to make sure that it's easier in the process to report a crime, is easier and more efficient as well. And also, I think we need to make sure that we're holding our community members accountable to building relationships with our officers so that we can communicate better about what new laws are coming down, so we can educate the community on what you can be pulled over, why you can't be pulled over, so we're more educated on these policies regarding policing. But what we want to do now is kind of give this mic back to the to the audience. And after I allow Senator Akbari to make some comments about what you want to see from the police department and what does community look like in your eyes?
Thank you. So, and this is something that we grapple with certainly in the legislature on a number of a range of topics, but one is not to condemn a profession as a whole, not to condemn all police officers, not to condemn all teachers, all doctors, all lawyers. There are those in those related fields that maybe shouldn't be there. And that's something that we can agree and say, and it should not be offensive. If you are a bad attorney, you should not be an attorney. If you are a bad teacher, you should consider another career. If you are a bad doctor, and same I think with the police department. So it's not a wholesale crucifixion of the Memphis Police Department. It's just saying that there are certain things that we can do from a policy perspective and a community perspective that can, like Kermit said, stop the shooting of unarmed black men and women. I mean, you look at Nashville, there's a young man, Daniel Heinrich, 25 years old. You see the video. The video clearly shows him running. He is 20 feet from the police officer. The police officer is chasing him, stops, pauses, kneels, and shoots him in the back. Okay? Dead. Gone. Life snuffed out like that. Life is too fragile and it's too important for us not to seriously address this. And I think if we can get both sides, all entities to understand it's not an attack on you, it's saying this is a problem we have as a community and we're going to have to fix this together. We're going to have to work together as brothers or we're going to perish together as fools. And at the end of the day, the police department is supposed to protect and serve. It is supposed to be a protection, not just a punitive action. And I think we have to get more in tune with that. Because if those that you are policing don't feel safe, we have a problem.
Thank you so much for that. And we'll, I think now, take it back out to the audience to just ask, like, I think there are two questions that we pose. One, is it possible to improve community relations with the police? And then if we're there, right, what are some ways to do that? Having been grounded in both the history and the context, and understanding, like, the role that they play in the criminal legal system. And so we'll ask, if folks want to raise their hand, that'll be great. And then, sorry, we got to share a microphone.
Good evening, everyone. My name is so my name is Kendra Lee, and I could spend all night talking about the subject, but I'll try to condense it as best as possible. To me, we need police officers that come from the community. I don't think that community policing and law enforcement should be separate entities like they work and align with one another. I think it's when it comes to, I think of it as the dinner table syndrome. You can easily, you and I as a person, you can see that person related to you. And so if you have individuals that are in our community that do not come across some intersection, whether it's race, religion, finding some common ground, it is easy to take a life that you would consider to be important or have significance or matter in the first place. And so I think that if we have law enforcement in our communities, from our communities, that know our people, that make us feel comfortable, that make us feel safe, then we can be able to have that relationship being built. But I think that it has to start with some common ground being between the law enforcement and the community, and why not have that be the actual community itself?
Thank you so much. And we'll take another comment. Yeah,
I'm Terrence Boyce, and I just want to say, I think the police, I don't believe they're good police. I think all the police bad. And one reason I say that, because like this incident, where are the good cops? Like, the good cops should be saying something. If you're good, like if a pastor say something wrong, it's me, I have to say something and say something that's right. Like, and then, like, I think police is focused on the wrong thing. See, when they shut down that bridge, there was power. Man, we got to get these Negroes off that bridge because we got trucks and everybody coming through that bridge. It was money. Then you get people making up, police officers making Facebook pages. Why do you want to stop Hunter for trying to make the city good? Like, why do you want to stop activists for trying to do what's right? But it's all, to me personally, I don't think the police officers will ever stop killing us. They've been killing us with no camera. They've been killing us with a camera. Now we can see that they're killing us because they'll get fired from Memphis Police Department and go to Bartlett and get hired and get somebody, kill somebody else. So I don't think I think when we get in leadership, if I go in, let's just say to be a city council, I gotta be stepping in that I'm about to die. Because when you standing in leadership, people gonna be shooting on you. You gotta be willing to lose your life. That's where I think it is. We have to gain power in our community before anything. They ain't gonna shoot no Chinese man. Because China gonna call, I'm gonna start making them Jordans for y'all. and you see how much power that is? Man, we can kill niggas all day. Because who calling to say, man, we ain't got nothing. We ain't got nothing. Man, just shoot him. And then people are like, the media make it seem like that's all they showing, black killing black, black killing black. And then people at home is watching, and then I was scared of my life. They don't care if you're a Christian, a Muslim, or anything. If you black, they fear for their life. So I'm done. That's all I gotta say though. But we just gotta bridge the gap.
Check. Thank you so much. I will. Yeah, we'll take one or two more. Jaquez, yeah.
First off, I would like to thank the state elected officials for giving us this opportunity to be in front of them, as well as the principal here today as well for opening your doors up to the community. So I have as far as a comment and question. My comment is that, first off, I do agree with the representation of, as far as police officers, being the right police officers in the community, so right representation. With that being said, my question is, as we all know, I use this for example, that in LA used to have and probably still now used to have a huge problem between Bloods and Crips, different lines and affiliations, and I'm getting to my point. So what they did was, they knew that to be able to bring people together, they brought people together through sports. And so my question is that you talked about a way for us to, as far as build relationships between both parties, both alliance affiliations, so therefore they can feel comfortable. And so my question is it possible, or is it a way that we can be able to build a basketball league or something between officers and key community stakeholders, something of that nature, where now they're all on the same level playing field, and sports is the driving force behind everything, and now we can start to talk about things that are going on in different communities and different things of that nature. So back to my point, the question is it possible for us to be able to bring sports in place in the middle to be able to bridge the gap between key community stakeholders and as well as police officers?
Thank you so much for that comment and that idea. Great. Okay. Oh, we'll come back to your question.
So to your point, there's a program that exists. I think the problem is it probably needs to be strengthened. It needs more resources. There's something called COP, which is the Community Outreach Program. When I first decided to run for office, I was trying to clean up a local cemetery, and a group of police officers saw the story on the news, and that next Monday, 25 of them came on their day off and helped mow that lawn. They also do block parties, they do basketball, things like that, but I think it has to be a little bit more structured and a little bit more intense. This spring I learned about a program in Chicago that is very strategic. It was developed to try and reduce violent crime. And by also improving relationships with the police department. But it was led by gang members. It was led by older gang members, and the success, I mean, obviously, I think Chicago gets a bad rap because if you look at per capita violence, I mean, they have a lot of violence, but if you compare it to their population, it's not as much as it's been blown to be. But that actually has, at least when I'd heard about the program in the spring, there had been a significant reduction. So part of that is resources, right? But I do think that's a great idea and a great way to try and bridge a gap, focusing on, hey, like was said earlier, it's harder to be scared of someone that you know and that you understand and that you can humanize and identify with. And I think that that's a good step in that direction. Plus, at the same time, it gives people something to do in the city, which I think is good. So,
Thank you, Senator Akbari.
Yes, thank you for that. So we just saw our friends from Clerk walk in. We want to pose this question to the audience. What can community members do to hold the police accountable? And there's a presumption there, right, that we can hold the police accountable, but what are some mechanisms that are already in place? Are they working? And what else can we do to start seeing both some police accountability and safer communities in our neighborhoods? So, I'm looking at you, Paul, sorry. And then we'll go to you, Frank, is that cool?
Well, thanks for volunteering me, Erica. Hey folks, my name is Paul Garner. I work for the Mid-Southeastern Justice Center, where I'm the organizing director these days. So one of the issues that we worked on and have worked on for many years is police accountability. And so in 2015, we were successful in leading a campaign that got a stronger civilian police review board created by ordinance here in Memphis. You might have heard about the Civilian Law Enforcement Review Board. Has anybody heard of that? So it's already a problem that not everybody's heard of it. But basically, it was an ordinance that was originally passed in 1994, and it was set up as a civilian body, a non-law enforcement body that would oversee complaints against law enforcement when people aren't satisfied with the way internal affairs handled a complaint. Show of hands, has anybody filed a complaint with internal affairs before? A few folks. Keep those hands up if that went well for you. Okay, so that's part of the problem, right? And so for many years, internal affairs has been sort of like, that is the internal government mechanism by which individuals can hold law enforcement accountable. So you go to internal affairs, it's police officers investigating a complaint that you allege. In many cases, we've heard about folks being dissuaded from making complaints, not having the right ID to file a complaint, and basically a lot of issues where people just feel like it's not taken seriously. They're treated as though they are the culprit when they're filing a complaint. And it takes a lot of courage to get over the anxiety that a person who has just had a negative experience with law enforcement has to go through in order to file that complaint and then see it all the way through. So we've walked a lot of people through filing that process. And then the problem now, we have a stronger civilian law enforcement review board. They have a process by which they can use city council to subpoena officers. That's never happened. They've requested a subpoena from the city council. We've yet to see them even vote on that, and that's been months that this process has been in the works. So the police review board can only make recommendations back to the police department. So they could say, well, we find differently than internal affairs. We think excessive force was used here. We recommend to the police director to take a second look at this complaint, maybe look at some sensitivity training, maybe revisit, their use of body cameras or something like that. And so far, every recommendation that's gone to our police director has been shot down. They've thumbed their nose at that process. They don't respect that process. And so until we have a mayor who will hold our police director accountable, because let's not forget, the director is appointed by the mayor. So we really need to hear Jim Strickland and whoever our elected officials are who are mayor, looking at either stronger legislation so that when people do have a complaint, there's a board and a body that can oversee this complaint and do more than just make recommendations to somebody who's not going to pay any attention. But call your council people and ask them what are they doing to support civilian oversight of law enforcement, because under Obama's 21st century policing committee that they created, police oversight boards, independent bodies investigating complaints, does a lot more to ensure trust and accountability. They have to have real teeth though, and so the problem is that is the only process for police accountability, the only formal process for police accountability that exists in the city of Memphis right now, and it's not enough. So we have to how can we hold police accountable? I think it starts with holding our elected officials accountable. They're the ones that pass the legislation. They're the ones that hire and fire the police director. They're the ones that send the directives. So we have to do a better job, I think. Unfortunately, it's on us to push our elected officials to hold law enforcement accountable. So.
Thank you for that.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Frank Johnson, native South Memphian. I stay over by the depot. I think to hold them more accountable is that we do have to flex muscle as a community. It's going to be a combination. It's going to be a combination of what Representative Akbari is doing, what London is doing, but it also is going to take us out in the street organizing and just resisting and no longer being afraid to resist. Yeah, we have to call out our representatives, our city council members, our county commission members, but we have to organize, and I actually see that organization happening. And we can't be afraid to talk to each other, no matter where we come from. Look at me. I am about to get my master's degree. But yet, every time I drive through Castile going home, I get pulled over by a police officer who always seems to never see me wearing my seatbelt when I pass him. And then he has to pull me over, and I have to deal with 2 and 3 other police cars coming in, pulling up right next to me. And this seems like this happens every month. Now, I've lived where I've lived for 41 years. My daddy's been in the neighborhood since 1959. And I still go, and if it's not that, is this your car? Why are you over here? Or better yet, where are you going? So it's going to take organization from us. I think we spend too much time trying to say, it's not our police. But the way we're over-policed, it seems like they all view us one way. No matter what education level, I don't care what it is, whether we're innocent or guilty, we're treated the same way. Many of us choose not to talk about it anymore. We just kind of suck it up and go along with it. But we have to organize in the communities and resist. If that means blocking traffic, you're going to have to block some traffic. That's just...
And we've heard a number of people mention their stories with the police and their encounters with the police and attempts to hold the police accountable through CLERG. I know Nashville is working on their own civilian law enforcement review board or civilian oversight board. We've had body cameras and we've seen people be killed by the police while the police officers were wearing body cameras and still have seen no justice. And so I think our question now is, what are some alternatives to calling the police, to having the police in our neighborhoods? And how do we keep our community safe if that is our vision? And I say that knowing that our vision and our goal is to live in communities that are safe, where we don't need the police because our people are not committing crimes of poverty, or people are held accountable in ways that move them closer to being healed and being transformed. So what are some alternatives that come up for people when we think about calling the police?
And I also want to recognize Representative-elect Jesse Chisholm, who walked in. Raise your hand, Jesse. Thank you for being here and for your support. They've given us recommendations.
Right, so we'll pass it back out to the audience to hear some of your vision, some of what it looks like. And like dig deep, be innovative.
Hi, my name is Agana Hansen. As far as what we can do, my first thing that I always tell people, we need a minimum wage. A lot of the problems in our community exist because people are poor, we live in poverty. The second thing, in our county, we spend $8 million in Shelby County a year on community services compared to the $172 million that we spend on the sheriff's department. And then we say how, what's wrong with our communities, what's wrong with our neighborhood. And so my personal, belief that I hope that y'all will join me in this is that we need to spend more money on community services. We can't expect for our communities our communities reflect our investment in them. And so if we want to see our communities improve, we have to make that investment. The same investment that we make in the sheriff's department. We need to make that investment in our communities.
So Ayanna spoke about the sheriff's budget, and just want to lift up the policing budget is about $260 million compared to the parks budget, which is $36 million, and the library's budget, which is $20 million. So it feels like what you're saying, and where word on the street is that people want to see their communities invested in. That's one of the ways that we can actually keep our communities safe. One possible alternative. Any other alternatives that people feel? No? I think what we'll do is oh, come on, Frank.
I think we can, like I said, organizing each other, but we got guys and stuff on the street corners that's just doing nothing. Do like we used to do when we had the beacons of justice and all that type of stuff. Train these guys and talk to these guys to get out here and just watch the neighborhood. We used to have that when I was little. The guys used to just be in the neighborhood. They would just watch and see everything that went on, just something basic. But the key to that is, black folk, we got to talk to each other. We got to get rid of these attitudes to where you live over here and you talking about them over there like they talk about all of us. We got to get rid of this attitude of thinking that we got one up on the other brothers and the other brothers and sisters are irrelevant. We got to get rid of that attitude because we got a large class of black people in Memphis that has this bourgeois attitude. Not understanding is that it's them too. So we can organize the community, have these young guys and these young girls just watch the neighborhood like we used to. First of all, let's talk to them. A lot of them ain't been talked to. We don't want to talk to each other. We want to talk at each other, but we don't want to talk to each other. And then you got a whole neighborhood police force or neighborhood watch right there in front of you.
So thank y'all so much for y'all's participation. Just appreciate your insight, your expertise, and even your vision of what it could look like to live in safer communities and hold police accountable. And so now we'll hear a last word from Representative Akbari in London, Mr. Lamar, and then we'll talk about next steps.
Okay. First of all, thank you, London, for convening this meeting. I think that the more conversations we have as a community, the better. But it is up to us to take that next step to make sure that it's not just a conversation, that we have action items and that we all do our part to move this conversation forward. I certainly think that London and I have some good marching orders and some things that we are able to look at legislatively, but I ask that you all be patient because when you're trying to do good work, sometimes it takes time, and even more than what you think it takes. So just know that even if you don't see immediate results, we are working on your behalf. Even if you don't hear about it in the news, that doesn't mean we aren't having those conversations. And certainly know that we are both resources to you. If there's ever anything you need, and it's in our power to fix it, we will try our best. And if it's not, we can at least contact the appropriate agency or elected office that can. So it's up to us as a community, y'all. Only we can move Memphis forward. Only we can make sure that our voices are heard. This is just a start. And I can't even say this is a start because everybody in this audience has been in this struggle for a while. So this conversation is a good spark. But again, it's up to us to keep that going. And I hope that when we reconvene in Nashville, I will see you all up there because I'm tired of people writing the narrative for Memphis. It's time for Memphians to write the narrative for Memphis. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Akbari. I want to thank Erica for working with me to put this meeting on. This wouldn't have been successful without you, so thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I don't think we oftentimes uplift the black lawyers who are out here doing the work. A lot of times we focus on attorneys, but after we're protesting, after the laws have been changed, things we want to amend, we're dependent on our black lawyers to represent us in those courtrooms. And sometimes that's even more than a battle that we think. So we want to uplift our attorneys and thank them for everything that we're doing to support these efforts. I want to again thank Raumesh Akbari for coming, and I want to thank Representative Jesse Chisholm for coming, and everyone else in the audience. I think that this conversation is very important. I think that I want the community to know that you have an incoming senator and an incoming representative who hears your cries, who understand there's a need to improve the policing in our community, police accountability, and we want to be effective and efficient at doing that. And so we have a whole list of recommendations to take back. What we'll be doing is together working with Erica to come up with a memorandum that we're going to present to the Memphis Police Department and the House legislators from the Shelby County area about ways that we want to improve community policing, and then from there we can go ahead begin on that path to craft the legislation and go ahead and improving the policies that we feel like are impacting our communities. And so again, these conversations are ongoing. This is just a start. What we want to do is let you know there's an open door. And so we want to let you know that you can always come to our offices and always come to us about what you want to see done, and we will always be a voice and be an ear for you. So I wanted to again thank you for coming out. And if you have any more questions, please, or comments, please leave them on the cards, and we will take this and keep these as we begin improving our community. Thank y'all.